Hello and welcome to our Wednesday Bible study for Fort Wayne Baptist Church. Today is November 25th in the year 2020, one day till Thanksgiving and 1 month till Christmas. We're going to continue our look at the liturgical calendar, the Christian calendar today, with Epiphany. Epiphany is traditionally January 6th, but in many modern traditions, it is simply observed on the first Sunday that follows January 1st. Epiphany is the day after the 12th day of Christmas. Uh, Much like the song, um, when you get past your 12 maids a milking, the next day is Epiphany. Uh, Sometimes the day before is called the 12th night, the day of feasts, before a fast of Epiphany, sometimes a feast of Epiphany. You may have noticed already that this is a tradition that is celebrated and honored in different ways in different places all over the world. The word itself, Epiphany, comes from the Greek phainein, which means to appear. Now, in Greek, the phrase the Epiphany usually referred to the dawn, or perhaps the enemy arriving on the battlefield, but was most often used of a god appearing to a worshiper. In the Septuagint, which is the Greek version of the Old Testament, the term appears in the manifestation of God to Israel. In the New Testament, it is used in 1 Timothy to refer to Jesus's appearance, uh, and several other times to refer to his second coming. Sometimes Epiphany is associated with the three wise men. This is the case in many traditions. And in fact, in some places, Epiphany is called Three Kings Day. We'll talk more about the three kings in a few minutes. Epiphany probably originated among the Greek-speaking eastern half of the Roman Empire, and was most likely a celebration of Jesus' baptism. In many places, it became associated with his birth due to a misunderstanding of John's Gospel, which said that Jesus was baptized when he was 30. And some people took that to mean on his 30th birthday. Therefore, if you're going to observe January 6th as his baptism, then January 6th is also his birthday. And this is the case in a lot of Orthodox countries today. The early reference we have to Epiphany as a Christian feast is in the year 361 AD, of course. The holiday is listed as a double feast of both his baptism and his birth. Later, the Latin-speaking West emphasized the visit of the Magi on this day. The Magi represented the non-Jewish people who came to understand the revelation to the Gentiles in Jesus Christ. And Christian writers interpreted this as the day to celebrate God including Gentiles in his plan. John Chrysostom, a famous early preacher and teacher, said when the meeting, in regards to the meeting between the Magi and Herod's court, The star had been hidden from them so that, on finding themselves without their guide, they would have no alternative but to consult the Jews. In this way, the birth of Jesus would be known to all. That a natural phenomena or a supernatural phenomena seen as a natural one led Gentiles to search, and in their searching asked the Jews, and thus were able to discover Christ. Now, technically, Epiphany is one day. Many traditions hold the season after Epiphany as Epiphany tide. Some make a point that it is not a season, but rather Sundays after Epiphany. I don't, especially for Baptists, think that that is a huge distinction. Um, However, when observing Epiphany, do like to talk about God's revelation of himself in Epiphany. That's what we're celebrating, is the revelation of God, particularly in the person of Jesus Christ, and to a larger degree, his revelation of himself to the whole world. Um, those that observe Epiphany tide, uh, it begins with Epiphany and ends with the last Sunday before Lent, which is Transfiguration Sunday, the celebration of Jesus' appearing in glory to Peter, James, and John alongside Elijah and Moses. In John's Gospel, this marks a transition between Jesus teaching and Jesus going to Jerusalem to die. We celebrate the visit of Magi on Epiphany, and I think the visit of the Magi is one of those events that we often misunderstand because of some of our traditions that we've associated with it. I'm going to read Matthew chapter 2, the first couple of verses, the first 12. And this is where, of course, we get our information about the Magi. They're not mentioned in the other Gospels. But we're going to read this, and then we're going to talk about it a little bit. Matthew chapter 2, verse 1. But Jesus was born in Bethlehem in Judea during the time of King Herod. Magi from the east came to Jerusalem and asked, "Where is the one who has been born King of the Jews? We saw his star when it rose and have come to worship him." When King Herod heard this, he was disturbed, and all Jerusalem with him. When he had called together all the people's chief priests and teachers of the law, he asked them where the Messiah was to be born. "In Bethlehem, in Judea," they replied, "for it was written, for this is what the prophet has written. But you, Bethlehem, in land of Judah, are by no means least among the rulers of Judah, for out of you will come a ruler who will shepherd my people Israel." Herod called the Magi secretly and found from them the exact time the star had appeared. He sent them to Bethlehem and said, "Go and search carefully for the child. As soon as you find him, report to me, so that I may too go and worship." They had heard the king, they went on their way, and the star they had seen when it rose went ahead of them until it stopped near the place where the child was. When they saw the star, they were overjoyed. On coming to the house, they saw the child with his mother Mary, and they bowed down and worshipped him. They opened their treasures and presented him with gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh. Having been warned in a dream not to go back to Herod, they returned to their country by another route. This is the word of the Lord. Thanks be to God. We read this, and there's a couple of things we need to note. First of all, the time frame. Based on Herod's order later in this chapter of Matthew, we reckon that Jesus was about 2 years old by this point. Notice that they visit the child with his mother in the house. This is not the same night as the shepherds visiting, no matter what we may have learned in our little bathrobes marching down the aisle for the Christmas play. It is a separate event. Matthew includes this rather than many details about Jesus' birth because this is part of what Matthew wants to emphasize in his gospel. He wants his readers, who are predominantly Jewish, to see that God has extended the invitation of salvation to other people, to the Gentiles. The Magi, being the first to acknowledge and worship Jesus as the Messiah, shows a special insight from them that Matthew's implying that a lot of the other Jews didn't see. And second thing, because of the gifts of gold, frankincense, and myrrh, we tend to depict three wise men, three kings. The idea that there were kings comes from a medieval idea that no one but a king could afford these kind of gifts, and simply isn't appropriate. There's nothing in the context about them being kings. More likely, they were astrologers, wise men. It is from this word that we get the word magic and magician. But ultimately, it just means wise man. Someone who is well learned and understand how the world works. And they were probably part of a long-standing Persian tradition of those who searched writings and the stars for wisdom. That there were three also comes from the three gifts. We have no idea how many there were. There was more than one, that's clear. And we don't know if they came with a huge entourage or if it was just a handful. I kind of like the idea of a great mass of people showing up at Mary's house, knocking on the door. Excuse me, can we come in? Them not being Jews and their very presence in the house being a defilement of laws of clean and unclean. And yet they show up. The Epiphany is a time to remind ourselves that all we really know of God is his gift to us. God is so alien that he must reveal himself. During the Old Testament period, this revelation was imperfect at best because God was so much more than we could ever understand. Jesus represents God's best possible way to speak to us by becoming us, by translating himself into the form of Jesus. Now, as the phrase goes, something is lost in translation. Jesus, to become all human and remain all God, limited himself in his knowledge, in his power. He chose that. He chose to limit himself. We know he chose to limit himself because when asked about his return, he says, I do not even know the day and the hour myself, but only God the Father knows. He clearly chose in his earthly form to not know some things. We need to be reminded of the gift we are given. We also need to be reminded of the responsibility we are given. We are supposed to be the star that guides. We are supposed to be the ones who help others find Jesus. When we become concerned with more earthly matters than we do our call to proclaim the gospel, the good news, then we fail. We fail to be what we're supposed to be. Because while Epiphany is a single day in the church calendar, it is really something that happens every day. And it is something that we are supposed to be actively taking part in. I hope the spirit of Epiphany touches you today. And I hope that you have a good and safe Thanksgiving, however you're choosing to celebrate it this year. And please be careful and mindful of those you interact with in the coming days. We want everybody to be healthy. May God bless you. Amen.